The small town always felt alive with chatter, laughter, and the sound of footsteps rushing through its narrow streets. But in the middle of all that noise, there was one person who never seemed to make a sound. She moved quietly, always polite, always helpful, but never loud. People greeted her with kind smiles, yet few ever stopped to truly notice her. She worked at a little corner cafe, serving tea and coffee to regulars who came more for gossip than caffeine. To them, she was just another face behind the counter. Every morning, she unlocked the cafe before sunrise, breathing in the soft scent of roasted beans. The air was always cool at that hour, and the streets still carried the calm of night. She liked that time of day best, when the world hadn't started rushing yet. There was an old piano in the corner of the cafe, slightly out of tune, its wood faded with time. It had been there for years, untouched except for the occasional curious child tapping its keys. The owner had bought it secondhand, thinking it might add charm to the place, but nobody ever played it. Sometimes, when the cafe was empty, she would glance at the piano and wonder what it sounded like. There was something about it that felt alive, even in its silence. During slow hours, she would quietly wipe the dust off its surface, pretending it was just part of cleaning, though deep inside, her hands longed to touch the keys. Music had always drawn her in. When she was younger, she would stop outside a music shop near her home just to listen. She couldn't afford lessons, and her family couldn't buy her an instrument. But that never stopped her from dreaming. She had learned to recognize melodies just by listening. She watched people play in videos, memorizing how their fingers moved, how their faces softened when the sound carried through the room. She had no teacher, no formal knowledge, just a heart that understood what music could say when words failed. Her co-workers at the cafe often chatted while she stayed quiet, busying herself with dishes and wiping tables. They didn't mean to leave her out, but she never joined in their laughter either. It wasn't that she didn't want to. She just didn't know how. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. She liked silence, the kind that let her think. One night after closing, she was about to leave when her eyes drifted again to the piano. The dim lights of the cafe cast soft shadows across the room. Outside, rain tapped against the window. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked toward it. The bench creaked as she sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys. They were cold, a little sticky from years of neglect. She pressed one key gently. The note echoed softly, trembling at first, then fading into the quiet room. A small smile touched her lips. She pressed another and then another. The sounds were uneven, imperfect, but they filled the space like tiny sparks of life. She didn't know the right way to play, but she followed her instincts. Her fingers began to move with growing confidence, remembering every sound she had ever heard, every melody that had stayed in her mind. She played until the rain stopped, and when she finally stood up, she felt lighter. She didn't realize someone had been walking by the cafe outside, pausing for a moment to listen through the window. The next day, everything went on as usual. She smiled politely at customers, took orders, cleaned tables. But inside, something had changed. She had touched that piano, and now she couldn't stop thinking about it. So every night after closing, she stayed a little longer. She played in secret, trying new sounds, experimenting with chords. The piano was old, but it responded to her like it had been waiting all this time. She began to teach herself songs by ear, humming quietly as she played. Weeks passed, and her playing grew better. Sometimes her hands trembled when she hit a wrong note, but she kept going. The cafe owner, unaware of her nightly practice, noticed that the piano sounded a little more alive these days, but never questioned why. She wasn't doing it for attention. It was for herself. It was her peace, her escape. Then one afternoon, the cafe owner decided to host a small music evening. Local singers, guitarists, and piano players were invited to perform. Flyers went up around town, and soon everyone was talking about it. She helped prepare for the event, arranging chairs and cleaning the stage area, though she planned only to watch. She had never played in front of anyone before, not even her family. On the day of the event, the cafe was packed. People filled every seat, laughter and excitement bouncing off the walls. The performers played cheerful tunes, and the audience clapped and cheered after every song. It was warm, lively, and full of energy. But one performer didn't show up, a pianist who had been scheduled to play near the end. The owner looked around nervously, whispering to the staff. Then his eyes landed on her. "You play a little, don't you?" he asked with a half smile. "Come on, just a song. It'll be fun." The staff chuckled lightly, thinking it was a joke. The customers, overhearing, started to whisper. She froze, her hands tightening around the tray she was holding. Her heart began to race. She shook her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't," but the owner insisted kindly. "Just one song. He'll be fine." She looked at the piano in the corner. Her chest tightened. For a second, she imagined the quiet nights when it was just her and the sound of keys. She took a slow breath. The thought of all those eyes on her made her palms sweat, but something deep inside told her to try. The room hushed as she walked toward the piano. A few people smiled politely. Others looked amused, expecting nothing more than a few clumsy notes. Her hands trembled as she sat down. The lights felt brighter, the air heavier. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She took another breath, closed her eyes, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first sound that came out was soft, uncertain, but then her hands remembered. The same warmth she had felt those nights alone began to rise within her. The notes flowed gently at first, like raindrops falling on a quiet evening. Then they grew stronger, weaving into a melody that spoke of hope, loneliness, and the quiet strength she carried inside. The chatter in the room faded. Every head turned toward her. The melody was unlike anything they had heard before. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Each note carried emotion that words couldn't express. Her fingers moved naturally, no longer afraid. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She was part of the sound, part of the moment. The cafe, once filled with noise and laughter, now sat in complete silence, every ear listening, every heart moved. When she finished, she didn't open her eyes right away. Her hands rested on the keys, shaking slightly. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the room burst into applause. The sound was thunderous, echoing off the walls. She looked up, eyes wide in disbelief. People stood, clapping, smiling, some even wiping tears. The owner stared at her with shock and pride. In that instant, she felt something she had never felt before. Not pride, not fame, but freedom. All the quiet days, all the silent dreams, had led to this one moment where her voice was finally heard without her ever saying a word. That night, when the cafe lights dimmed and the crowd left, she stayed behind. She placed her hand gently on the piano and smiled. It was no longer just an old instrument in the corner. It had become her friend, her secret keeper, and now the reason everyone finally saw her for who she truly was. The quiet girl who once blended into the background had found her melody, one that no one would ever forget. After that night, everything felt different in the small cafe. The quiet girl who used to move like a shadow was now the center of soft whispers and curious smiles. People still came in for their coffee, but they also came hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Some even asked the owner when she would play again. The owner, still surprised by what had happened, only smiled and said, "Maybe soon." She, however, didn't play again right away. The night of her performance had been magical, but it also left her shaken. She couldn't quite believe what she had done. For years she had played in silence only for herself. To suddenly be seen, to be heard, and it was overwhelming. Every time someone mentioned that night, she blushed and quickly changed the subject. Deep down, though, she felt a quiet joy. The music that had once been her secret was now a part of something bigger. The video someone had recorded during the event started spreading online. It wasn't a high-quality video, but it captured the emotion in her playing perfectly. People shared it, calling her the girl with the quiet hands. Within days, it had reached far beyond their little town. Comments poured in, praising her honesty and the beauty of her melody. Many said it felt like her music told a story they had all lived through in some way. She didn't even know about the video at first. It wasn't until her coworker showed her the post that she realized people everywhere were listening. The screen showed thousands of likes and shares. Her face turned red. She didn't know whether to smile or hide. The thought of strangers hearing her music made her both happy and scared. It had never been her plan to perform for anyone. She only played because it was the one place she could truly breathe. Her family found out too. They had always seen her as the quiet, practical one. Helpful, reliable, but ordinary. When they saw her playing in that video, they couldn't believe it. Her mother cried. Her father, who rarely spoke of emotion, simply nodded and said, "She's found her gift." For the first time, they understood something she had never been able to put into words. At the cafe, her days went on much the same. She still served coffee, wiped tables, and smiled politely. But now, when she walked by the piano, Customers sometimes asked her to play. Most days she politely refused. She wanted to wait for the right moment. She didn't want her music to become just another performance. For her, every note had to mean something. One evening, as the cafe was closing, a woman approached her. She introduced herself as a music teacher from a nearby city. She had seen the video and wanted to meet her in person. The teacher spoke gently, her eyes kind but curious. She said she had been teaching for over 20 years and rarely came across someone who played with such emotion. She invited her to visit the music school, to see what she could learn if she decided to train properly. The offer made her heart beat faster. She had never thought about studying music formally. Lessons cost money, and she barely earned enough to help at home. Still, the idea of learning from someone who understood her passion felt like a dream. The teacher gave her a card and told her to think about it. "Talent like yours shouldn't be hidden," she said before leaving. That night, she sat by the piano long after closing. The cafe was quiet, the lights dimmed. Her reflection stared back from the glossy surface of the instrument. Could she really leave everything behind to study music? Was she ready for that world? She played a few soft notes, letting her thoughts drift. The music always helped her decide things. By the time she stopped playing, her mind was clear. She wanted to try. The next week, she took a day off and traveled to the city. The music school was much bigger than she expected, with wide hallways and rooms filled with instruments. She felt small walking through them. The teacher greeted her warmly and led her to a room with a grand piano. Its black surface gleamed under the lights. It was beautiful, intimidating, and perfect. The teacher asked her to play something. Her hands trembled as she sat down. The piano felt different from the one at the cafe, smoother, more powerful. She began to play the same melody she had played that night, the one that had changed her life. The sound filled the room, rich and full. When she finished, the teacher didn't speak for a long moment. Then she smiled and said softly, "You don't play with your hands. You play with your heart." That was the beginning of something new. She started visiting the city once a week to learn from the teacher. The lessons were simple at first: posture, timing, how to read sheet music. She struggled in the beginning because she had learned everything by ear. Reading notes felt like learning a new language. But she worked hard, staying up late after her shifts to practice. Slowly, the letters and symbols began to make sense. She was discovering a new side of the thing she loved most. Her teacher was patient and encouraging. She never pushed too hard, but always believed in her. Each time she played, the teacher reminded her not to lose the feeling in her music. "Technique is important," she said, "but the world remembers emotion more than perfection." Back in the cafe, her coworkers began to notice changes in her. She stood a little taller, smiled more often, and her eyes carried a quiet confidence. Sometimes, after closing, she played a few soft tunes for them. They would sit in silence, just listening, forgetting their tiredness for a while. The piano, once ignored, had become the soul of the place. Months passed and her skills grew. The teacher encouraged her to join a small recital at the school, a gathering where students performed for friends and family. The idea terrified her, but she agreed. She remembered how she had felt that night in the cafe, the fear, the silence, and the rush of joy when the first note came out right. She wanted to feel that again, but this time on purpose. When the day came, she wore a simple dress and sat backstage, her hands cold. She could hear the soft murmur of the audience outside. Most of them were students' families, strangers to her. When her name was called, she walked to the piano, her heart thumping. The lights felt hot, but she focused on the keys. She played a piece she had written herself, one that blended her memories from the cafe with what she had learned at the school. The melody began softly, like the start of a conversation, then built into something deeper. Every note carried a piece of her story, the loneliness, the discovery, the quiet hope. By the time she finished, there were tears in more than one pair of eyes. The applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was heartfelt. Her teacher stood in the corner, smiling proudly. After the recital, several people came up to her. Some were students, others visitors. They told her how the music had made them feel something real. One woman said it reminded her of her own childhood. Another said it gave her peace. Hearing those words made her realize something. Music didn't just belong to her anymore. It belonged to everyone who listened. When she returned to the town that night, she walked past the cafe, which was closed and quiet. Through the window, she could see the piano waiting in the corner. She smiled softly. Her journey had started there, and she knew she would never forget it. But she also knew she was meant to go further. The world was bigger than she had imagined, and her melody had just begun to travel through it. That night, before going to bed, she wrote a small note to herself. It said, "Keep playing. No matter what happens, keep playing." She folded it neatly and placed it inside her bag, next to the sheet music her teacher had given her. It was her promise, not to fame or success, but to the sound that had always lived inside her. The sound no one had expected, yet everyone now carried in their hearts. Her days became a careful balance between work at the cafe and lessons at the music school. Each morning she woke early to open the cafe, serving regulars who now treated her with gentle curiosity rather than simple politeness. She smiled more often now, a quiet strength in her expression that made people wonder what had changed. The old piano in the corner, once silent and overlooked, had become her secret place of practice during slow hours. Every night after closing, she sat at that piano, letting her fingers run over the keys. She would sometimes hum along softly, the sound blending with the quiet hum of the cafe's machines. Even after all the attention she had received, she found comfort in these moments alone. The music was hers, and she treated it with reverence. Her lessons at the school grew more challenging. The teacher introduced her to new techniques, scales, and exercises that pushed her limits. Sometimes she would struggle with the new rhythms or notes. Her fingers would stumble and frustration would creep in. But every time she felt like giving up, she remembered the first time she played in the cafe, the first time she had felt truly alive. She reminded herself that music was not about perfection. It was about expression. Slowly, she learned to combine emotion with skill, each day bringing a new sense of accomplishment. The teacher encouraged her to start composing her own pieces. At first, she was hesitant. She had always played melodies she remembered or created in her mind, but writing them down felt permanent, like leaving a piece of herself for the world to see. She began with small notes and simple chords, experimenting late into the night after her cafe shift. Some pieces were messy, some felt empty, but each attempt taught her something new. One evening, she finished a composition that felt different from all the others. The melody was gentle, with moments of sadness and hope intertwined. She played it repeatedly, letting the music speak before she could put words to it. Her heart raced as she imagined sharing it with others. This piece felt personal, almost like a letter she had written to herself. She decided to play it during her next recital. At the cafe, her co-workers had started to ask questions about her music. They wanted to know how she learned so quickly, how she could create such beautiful sounds. She smiled politely, keeping her explanation simple. She didn't want to boast. She wanted them to understand that music came from the heart. Occasionally, she played for the staff when the cafe was quiet. The sound would fill the room, and even the most tired worker would stop to listen, transported by the melody. One weekend, the teacher invited her to perform at a small city event. It was an informal gathering, but it was bigger than anything she had done before. Her parents came along, proud but anxious to see her in a crowd. The day of the performance, she felt the familiar nervousness, the trembling hands and racing heartbeat. But she remembered the cafe, the first notes, and the feeling of her music touching hearts. She sat at the piano and began to play. The melody flowed naturally, starting soft and tentative, then building in strength and clarity. Her composition filled the room, reaching into every corner, wrapping around each listener. She noticed faces turning toward her, eyes wide with wonder. Some smiled, some held back tears, and all listened with rapt attention. For the first time, she felt the music moving beyond herself, connecting with others in a way she had never imagined. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. She stood, bowing softly, her hands trembling. Her teacher gave her a proud smile, and her parents embraced her tightly. They spoke of how she had grown, how the music had become a bridge between her quiet world and the hearts of those around her. She felt a warmth that she could never have experienced before, a deep sense of belonging. After that performance, invitations started to come in. Small music schools, local festivals, and even community centers wanted her to play. Each offer made her heart race. She knew she couldn't accept them all, but the thought that people genuinely wanted to hear her music was overwhelming. She was no longer the quiet girl behind the cafe counter. She had become someone who inspired others through sound. Back at the cafe, life continued, but now it was touched by her growing presence. Customers who once ignored her now watched her with curiosity, often leaving kind notes of encouragement. She began to feel that she had a place both in the cafe and in the larger world. The piano became her bridge between the familiar and the unknown, a constant reminder that she could reach beyond what she had once thought possible. One quiet night, she sat at the cafe piano alone, playing softly as she reflected on her journey. Her fingers moved with grace, each note carrying memories of her early days, the moments of doubt, and the first time she had been heard. She realized that her music had become more than melodies and chords. It was a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her quiet courage. She began to dream bigger. She imagined creating full compositions, writing music that told stories and sharing it with people she had never met. She wanted to inspire others who felt unnoticed, to show them that their quiet strength could also be seen and heard. Music had given her a voice, and she wanted to use it fully. Her teacher noticed this change in her. The lessons shifted from learning techniques to exploring creativity. She experimented with different genres, blending classical with modern soft tones with strong rhythms. She began to understand how music could be used to express feelings that words often failed to capture. Each practice session became a journey into her own heart. At home, her family supported her quietly but wholeheartedly. Her parents often watched from the doorway as she played, proud yet careful not to disturb her focus. Her younger siblings would sometimes peek in, eyes wide, captivated by the sounds she created. They had always known her as the quiet one, but now they saw her in a new light. She was someone capable of magic, someone who could transform silence into sound that moved people. Weeks turned into months, and her reputation continued to grow quietly. People in town began to recognize her name when she was mentioned online, and strangers would occasionally come to the cafe, hoping to hear her play. She remained humble, treating each day with the same care she had always shown. Music was not about fame. It was about connection, about touching hearts with honesty. Then came an unexpected invitation. A small local radio station wanted to record her playing and share it with listeners across the region. She hesitated, nervous about being heard by so many people at once. But she remembered the joy of her first performance at the cafe, the feeling of touching hearts with her music. She agreed, hoping that her sound could bring comfort and inspiration to those who listened. The recording session was a new experience. The microphones captured every nuance of her playing, every soft note and every strong chord. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow naturally. By the end of the session, she felt a deep satisfaction. Her music had left the small room and traveled beyond, reaching ears and hearts she would never meet. After the broadcast, messages began to arrive. People wrote about how her music had moved them, how it had made them remember loved ones or brought them peace during difficult times. She read each message quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes feeling tears prick at her eyes. She realized that her music had grown into something larger than herself, something capable of touching lives in ways she had never imagined. Through it all, she remained grounded. She still opened the cafe each morning, still greeted customers with a soft smile, and still found time for quiet nights at the piano. But now, she carried the knowledge that her hands, once thought ordinary, could create melodies that resonated far beyond the small town. She had become more than the quiet girl behind the counter. She had become a voice, a presence, a melody that would linger in hearts long after the notes faded. And each night, as she played alone in the cafe, she remembered why she began this journey. It wasn't for applause, recognition, or success. It was for the music itself, for the freedom it gave her, and for the way it could touch the lives of others. Each note was a reminder that even the quietest hearts could make a sound that mattered, a melody that no one could ever forget. Life continued in the small town, but the quiet girl who once blended into the background now carried herself differently. She still opened the cafe each morning, still served coffee and tea, still cleaned tables with her gentle movements, but people looked at her with curiosity and respect. Her music had changed the way they saw her, and even the smallest gestures, like the way she tilted her head when listening or hummed softly while working, carried a quiet confidence. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the cafe. The envelope was neatly addressed, and the handwriting suggested care and attention. She hesitated before opening it, a feeling of nervous anticipation rising in her chest. Inside was an invitation to perform at a regional music festival in a nearby city. They had seen her video online and wanted her to play for an audience far larger than she had ever imagined. The letter spoke of her music touching hearts and inspiring listeners, and it asked if she would grace the stage with her presence. She read the words over and over. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear but from excitement. For years she had played for herself and for the quiet moments in the cafe. Now she was being asked to share her gift with hundreds of strangers. The thought was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. She tucked the letter into her pocket and continued working, her mind swirling with possibilities. That evening she went to the piano in the cafe, pressing her fingers to the keys with a mixture of nervousness and determination. She played slowly at first, letting the music calm her thoughts. The melody grew stronger, more confident, as if the piano understood what lay ahead and wanted to guide her. She lost herself in the music, each note a step toward the unknown, each chord a bridge to a new chapter of her life. The days leading up to the festival were filled with preparation. She practiced relentlessly, experimenting with different pieces, refining her composition, and imagining the audience she had yet to meet. At night she stayed late at the cafe, letting the quiet of the town embrace her while her fingers danced over the keys. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was her companion, her mentor, and her voice. Her family supported her quietly but wholeheartedly. Her parents helped with chores at home, giving her extra time to practice. Her younger siblings often listened to her play, wide-eyed and fascinated. They no longer saw her as the quiet one in the house. They saw her as someone capable of creating beauty and touching hearts. Even the cafe owner, who had once seen her only as a quiet employee, now encouraged her, offering words of advice and gentle reminders to stay grounded. The day of the festival arrived. She traveled with her teacher to the city, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. The festival hall was massive, filled with rows of seats, bright lights, and a hum of anticipation. She had never seen so many people gathered for music, and the energy in the room was almost tangible. Backstage, she could hear other performers tuning their instruments and rehearsing. Her heart pounded as she waited for her turn. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, her hands slightly trembling. The lights were bright and the audience seemed endless. She took a deep breath and approached the grand piano at center stage. Its surface gleamed under the lights, and for a moment, she felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Then she remembered the cafe, the first notes she had ever played, and the feeling of touching hearts without even speaking. She let that memory anchor her. Her fingers touched the keys and the first notes flowed out softly. The melody began gently, drawing the audience in, then built gradually, growing in depth and emotion. Every note carried the story of her journey: the quiet girl in the cafe, the secret nights of practice, the first performance that had changed everything. The music spoke without words, expressing feelings too complex to describe otherwise. The audience listened, rapt, as the sound filled the hall, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. As she played, she noticed subtle reactions in the crowd. People leaned forward in their seats, some closed their eyes, and a few even wiped away tears. She felt a connection with every listener, a silent conversation through the language of music. Her nerves melted away, replaced by a sense of purpose and joy. Each note was not just a sound, but a reflection of her heart, an offering to those who were willing to listen. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. The clapping was thunderous, echoing off the walls and filling every corner of the space. She stood, bowed quietly, and allowed herself a small, shy smile. Backstage, her teacher hugged her tightly, whispering words of pride and encouragement. Her parents, who had traveled to see her, cried softly, their eyes shining with emotion. They had watched her grow from the quiet girl in the cafe to someone who could move hundreds of people with her music. After the festival, she returned home with a new sense of purpose. The experience had changed her in ways she could not fully describe. She realized that music was not just her escape. It was her voice, her way of communicating with the world. People she would never meet had been touched by her melodies, and the thought both humbled and inspired her. She understood that the journey she had begun in the quiet corners of the cafe was only just beginning. Her life continued, blending the familiar with the extraordinary. Mornings were still spent at the cafe, afternoons at the music school, and nights with her hands on the piano. Yet now her music carried a new confidence, a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. She started composing longer pieces, combining her own melodies with techniques she had learned from her teacher. Each piece told a story, a reflection of her emotions, experiences, and dreams. People in the town began to recognize her more often. Strangers would stop to ask when she would play, and friends encouraged her to hold small performances in local halls and community centers. She remained humble, taking each opportunity seriously, knowing that her music was not about fame but about connection. The quiet girl behind the cafe counter had become a messenger of feeling, a source of inspiration for those around her. One evening, as she played softly in the cafe after closing, she noticed a young girl standing at the doorway. The child had been listening silently, her eyes wide and full of wonder. The girl smiled and asked timidly if she could try playing the piano. She nodded, encouraging the child to sit on the bench. As the child pressed the keys, making soft, uneven sounds, she watched with gentle patience. She remembered herself, the years of quiet practice, the nights when the piano had been her only companion. She guided the young girl with kindness, showing her that music was not about perfection but about expression. That night, she stayed late at the cafe playing her new composition, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from sharing music, mentoring others, and continuing her journey. The piano, once a forgotten instrument in the corner, had become her voice, her anchor, and a symbol of transformation. She realized that her gift was not just to be performed but to be nurtured, shared, and passed on. In the following weeks, she continued to receive invitations to perform at small events, workshops, and local gatherings. She accepted a few, carefully balancing her time with her responsibilities at the cafe and her practice sessions. Each performance reinforced the same truth. Her music could touch hearts in ways words could not. She had found a way to communicate, inspire, and connect, all through the melodies that flowed from her hands. Her confidence grew, not from recognition or applause, but from the knowledge that she could create something meaningful. She continued to compose, experiment, and perform, knowing that the journey of music was ongoing and limitless. Each note, each chord, each melody was a testament to the power of persistence, passion, and quiet courage. And as she played late into the night, alone in the cafe, she felt the same joy and freedom she had felt the very first time her fingers touched the keys. The quiet girl had become a voice that no one could ignore, and her melody would continue to grow, reaching hearts far and wide. Life had become a blend of music, work, and quiet moments of reflection. She continued to open the cafe each morning, greeting the regulars with a gentle smile and listening to the stories of those who visited. Her music had transformed the town in ways no one expected. People no longer saw her as just the quiet girl behind the counter. She had become someone who could inspire, touch hearts, and make the ordinary feel extraordinary. The piano, once overlooked, had become the heart of the cafe. In the evenings, when the rush of customers faded, she would sit down and let her fingers wander over the keys. She experimented with new melodies, blending techniques she had learned with the emotion she carried from her own life. Each piece told a story, sometimes of sadness, sometimes of hope, sometimes of the quiet moments that spoke louder than words ever could. Her reputation had grown beyond the town. Invitations arrived from local schools, community centers, and small music festivals. Some were formal, others informal, but each one was a chance to share her music with people who might never have heard it otherwise. She chose carefully, only accepting events that felt meaningful and allowed her to remain true to the way she had always played, with honesty and heart. One weekend, she was invited to perform at a community gathering in the neighboring city. It was a warm, sunny day, and the crowd was diverse, filled with families, children, and elderly people. She sat up at the small stage, the sun glinting off the polished surface of the piano. Her hands trembled slightly, a familiar feeling that she had learned to embrace. When she played the first notes, the crowd fell silent. The melody flowed naturally, soft at first, then building in intensity, carrying with it the story of her journey, the years of quiet practice, the first unexpected applause, and the courage to share herself with the world. After the performance, several people approached her to share how the music had touched them. One woman spoke of her own struggles and how the melody had given her hope. A young boy shyly told her he wanted to learn piano because of her. She listened to each story with humility, realizing that her music was no longer just her own. It had grown into something larger, capable of inspiring, comforting, and connecting people who she might never meet again. Back in the cafe, life continued with its familiar rhythm. She continued to serve customers, clean tables, and pour coffee, but now the atmosphere was different. People listened, watched, and sometimes even paused their conversations to hear her play. Her co-workers, once unaware of the depth of her talent, now looked at her with admiration and curiosity. She shared small lessons with anyone interested, quietly encouraging them to explore music in their own way. At night, after closing, she would linger at the piano, playing melodies that seemed to come from nowhere. As if the piano itself had ideas to share, she experimented, created, and explored, never fearing mistakes. Each note, whether perfect or flawed, carried her emotions, her experiences, and her growth. The cafe had become a sanctuary, a place where music, life, and quiet reflection intertwined. Her family remained her anchor. They had watched her grow from a quiet girl into someone who could move audiences with her music. Her parents often sat in the cafe listening without words, proud of the journey she had undertaken. Her younger siblings sometimes joined her at the piano, eager to learn, inspired by her dedication and patience. She guided them gently, reminding them that music was not about perfection but about expression and connection. One evening, a young woman approached her at the cafe, holding a notebook of sheet music. She had heard her play at a local event and wanted advice on composing her own melodies. She looked nervous, shy, and unsure. She smiled warmly, inviting the young woman to sit at the piano beside her. Together they explored simple chords, learned how to blend notes into melodies, and experimented with harmonies. Watching the young woman grow in confidence reminded her of her own journey, the quiet nights of practice, and the courage it had taken to share herself with the world. As months passed, she continued to grow as a musician. Her compositions became more complex, layered with emotion and technical skill. She began recording her music privately, sharing it online with a small audience who appreciated her honesty and artistry. Messages poured in from people who felt seen, understood, and inspired by her melodies. She responded to each message with care, knowing the power music had to touch lives in unseen ways. One night, after a long day at the cafe, she sat at the piano, reflecting on the journey she had traveled. From the quiet girl who had never expected anyone to notice her, to the musician whose hands could carry stories to hundreds of people, she realized how far she had come. Her fingers moved over the keys with ease, weaving together past experiences, hopes, and dreams into a single melody. It was a composition of her life, honest and unpretentious, filled with emotion and warmth. She remembered the first time she had performed in the cafe, the first night her music had reached beyond herself. She thought of the people who had watched, listened, and applauded, the strangers who had become witnesses to her growth. Each note had been a step, each melody a milestone. Music had taught her patience, courage, humility, and the power of expression. Her teacher, who had guided her through the early stages of formal learning, continued to inspire her. Though she had grown capable of performing and composing on her own, the teacher reminded her always to stay true to the emotion behind the music. Technique and skill were important, but the heart of music lay in feeling and honesty. She carried this lesson in every note she played, every composition she wrote. One evening, a local journalist came to the cafe, curious about the girl whose music had moved so many people. They sat together and she shared her story quietly, focusing on the journey rather than the attention. She spoke of the quiet nights of practice, the courage it took to perform for the first time, and the realization that music was a language that could bridge gaps, touch hearts, and create understanding. The journalist listened intently, captivated not just by her talent but by her humility and authenticity. Word of her story and her music continued to spread, but she remained grounded. She did not seek fame or recognition. Her goal had never been applause or accolades. It had always been about creating, expressing, and connecting. She focused on each day, each performance, each melody, knowing that her music could make a difference, no matter the scale of the audience. Late at night, when the cafe was quiet and the town slept, she would sit at the piano and play melodies that reflected her innermost thoughts. Sometimes they were joyful, other times melancholic. Sometimes they spoke of dreams and hopes, sometimes of challenges and fears. Each note was a reflection of herself, a testament to the journey she had undertaken, and an offering to anyone who might listen. Her music began to influence others. Students she taught, young and old alike, started to explore their own creativity. They learned that mistakes were part of the journey, that expression mattered more than perfection, and that music could be a bridge to understanding themselves and others. She became more than a musician. She became a mentor, a quiet guide for those seeking to find their own voices. She continued to perform at small events, community gatherings, and informal recitals. Each time she approached the piano with the same humility and care as she had in the cafe, always remembering the first night her music had reached the hearts of strangers. Each performance reminded her of the power of quiet determination, of patience, and of the courage to share what was inside. Through all of this, she remained herself. She did not let recognition change who she was or the way she approached music. She understood that her hands, once overlooked, carried something unique and precious. She honored them by playing with honesty, integrity, and heart. Music had become more than a skill. It was her voice, her story, and her way of connecting with the world. As the years passed, she became known not just for her talent, but for the kindness and humility with which she shared it. People remembered the quiet girl who had once been invisible, and they marveled at the melody she had brought into their lives. Her compositions, performances, and teachings continued to inspire, proving that even the most unassuming person could create something beautiful, meaningful, and unforgettable. At the end of each day, she would sit alone at the piano in the cafe, playing softly as the sun set. The keys were familiar, comforting, and alive under her hands. She reflected on her journey, on the countless hours of practice, the first audience, the recitals, and the lives her music had touched. Each note was a memory, a story, and a promise. She realized that her journey was not about reaching fame or acclaim. It was about the quiet power of persistence, the courage to share one's gifts, and the joy of connecting with others through something as simple and profound as music. Her hands had spoken when words could not, and through them she had touched hearts, changed lives, and created a melody that no one would ever forget. In the soft glow of the cafe lights, with her fingers gliding over the keys, she understood that her music would live on, not just in recordings or performances, but in the hearts of everyone who had listened. Her melody had become timeless, a testament to the beauty that could emerge from quiet strength, persistence, and the courage to follow one's heart. No one had expected a melody like that from her hands, and yet it had changed the world around her in ways she could never have imagined.